I had been cooking for the garrison at Thane's Cross for 11 years, before the sea gave up something that was supposed to be dead, and I want to say I handled it well. I didn't. Nobody did. We felt it before we saw it, a pressure in the air like a held breath, and then the supply depot's east wall came apart in a single motion, timber and stone folding outward, as if the building had simply decided to open. What came through the gap wasn't fast. That was the worst part. It moved like something that had all the time in the world, slate gray and scarred along one flank in long pale ridges, wings half furled, dragging a hind leg that had been broken so long ago the bone had healed crooked. The old-timers in the mess line went white. I heard someone say a name under his breath like a curse he'd hoped never to use again. Vaelithra. And then the shouting started, and the shouting was mostly just men running. It didn't breathe fire. It didn't need to. It swept 2 supply wagons into kindling with its tail, took the roof off the armory, and was gone again into the storm before the watch cannons had even finished swinging around to bear on empty air. 15 minutes, maybe less. By the time it was over, we had 6 wounded, a collapsed grain store, and a depot commander named Ashford, screaming for someone to explain how a dragon we'd killed at the Battle of Thane's Cross 15 years back had just walked through our wall like it owned the place. I don't fight. I never have. My war was feeding men who did, and that night I fed them standing in ash, ladling stew into shaking hands, while the surgeon worked 2 tables down, and somebody's radio crackled with reports of the thing last seen heading back out over open water. I've buried the sound men make when they've been beaten by something they can't touch. It isn't the sound of pain. It's quieter than that. I found her an hour before dawn, when the wreckage had gone from urgent to merely sad. She was wedged under the collapsed grain store's foundation beam, small enough that I nearly mistook her for a torn feed sack, pale as bone, scaled all over the way a true dragon is scaled, not some smooth palace thing out of a story, with wings still creased and wet, and a foreleg bent wrong beneath her. She made no sound at all. She just watched me with an eye the color of weak tea, waiting, I think, to find out what kind of thing I was going to be. Sergeant Ashford's men found her 20 minutes after I did, and I watched the fear in that garrison curdle into something uglier. One of them, a boy no older than my own son would have been, raised the butt of his rifle like he meant to finish what the collapse had started. "Leave the runt for the crows," he said, and I don't think he meant to be cruel. I think he was just very frightened and needed the fear to have somewhere to go. I put myself between him and her before I'd decided to. I hadn't planned it. My hands were still greasy from the stew pot. "She didn't do this," I said. "Look at her. She's half your size and broken worse than the wall is. She's kin to the thing that broke it. Maybe. Or maybe she's the reason it came." Nobody had an answer for that, and fear, in my experience, doesn't hold up well against a question it can't finish. Ashford let me take her to the kitchen stores, on the condition, his words, that I understood what I was keeping alive, and whose fault it would be if it turned on us in our sleep. I named her Pearl because that was the only word that fit the color of her, and because she needed a name that wasn't the one everyone was already afraid of. She didn't eat for 2 days. On the 3rd, I sat with a bowl of broth and just talked to her, the way I'd talk to a burn victim who couldn't answer back. About nothing. About the weather. About how my boy used to hate barley soup and eat it anyway, rather than hurt my feelings. Somewhere in that nonsense, she put her head against my knee, careful of the broken foreleg, and let me feed her from my hand. It's a small thing. I've thought about it more than almost anything else I did in that war. I set her leg with kitchen splints and old bandage linen, because the surgeon had 6 human patients ahead of her, and I wasn't going to argue that order, only fill the gap myself. I learned the particular patience it takes to hold still for a creature that could take your arm off by accident and never notice, and how much of that patience is just refusing to flinch first. 9 days after the wall came down, she came back. We felt the pressure again before we saw her, that same held breath stillness, and this time half the garrison ran for the guns, and I ran the other way, toward the stores, toward Pearl, because I'd already decided, somewhere in 9 days of barley soup and broken bone, that I wasn't handing her to anyone or anything without a fight I had no business winning. Vaelithra came down in the open yard, not through a wall this time. Up close, in daylight, she wasn't the thing the old-timers had described. She was old, ancient in the way stone is ancient, ridged and cracked and slate gray, and she was starving, and she was, I understood all at once, looking for something with the single-minded desperation of a creature that had been looking for 15 years. She'd lost her clutch in the first battle of Thane's Cross, buried under the same grain store foundation that had nearly buried Pearl. Everyone had assumed the whole nest died that night, Vaelithra included, assumed her dead too, when in truth, she'd only gone under, wounded past flying, and spent a decade and a half rising and falling and rising again, along that same stretch of coast, searching a ruin that had long since been rebuilt on top of the thing she was looking for. She hadn't been attacking us out of hatred. She'd been tearing the depot apart looking for her daughter, in the only place she remembered her daughter had last been. I carried Pearl out to the yard myself, against every order Ashford was shouting, because I understood before anyone else did what the guns were about to prevent. Vaelithra went still when she saw her. I have never in my life seen an animal, or a person, go that still. Pearl made a sound then, the first real sound I'd heard from her. Small and cracked and unmistakably a child's cry for her mother, and I felt something in me go loose with relief, even as 3 rifles swung to bear on the both of them. I stepped into the space between the guns and the dragons, because that's the only kind of brave I've ever been, the kind that doesn't plan ahead. Something caught my shoulder as I moved, a wingtip or a claw, glancing, not meant for me at all, and it opened a shallow gash that should have hurt worse than it did, and somehow never fully closed right afterward, healing instead into a raised, textured line of scar that catches the light strangely to this day, like a seam of pale scale worked into ordinary skin. Nobody fired. There wasn't time, and then there wasn't any reason to. Vaelithra took her daughter up as gently as I've ever seen anything that large take anything, and looked at me. Just looked, for a long moment, with that same weak eye Pearl had, before she rose off the broken ground and carried her out over the water, back toward wherever the rest of her kind still were. She came back once more, a season later, alone, and set something at the depot gate before she left again. A single scale, slate gray, the size of a dinner plate, still warm. Ashford wanted it catalogued as a weapon specimen. I keep it in the kitchen instead, propped against the flour bin, where I can see it while I cook. I don't tell this story often. When I do, people always want to know if she came back a 3rd time, if there was more to it, some grander ending. There wasn't. She got her daughter back. I got a scar that aches faintly before rain, and a scale that holds down a stack of ration ledgers. Some debts don't need repeating to be paid in full. Ashford retired the year after, and the new commander wanted the wall rebuilt higher, with spotters posted round the clock for anything coming in off the water. I didn't argue that either, but I kept the kitchen stores exactly where they'd always been, low windows facing the sea, in case anything small and pale ever needed somewhere quiet to heal again. Nothing ever has. I still set an extra bowl some evenings anyway, more out of habit than hope, and let it go cold by the stove before I bring it back in. My boy asked me once why I kept doing it, so many years on. I told him some kindnesses aren't owed to anyone in particular. You just leave the door open, and trust that whatever needs it will know.